First off, for anyone who doesn't know about Homestuck, this is Rose Lalonde. Rose is from a webcomic by the name of Homestuck. Homestuck was a webcomic best described as like a shitpost epic. It's most well known for being so wildly popular that its updates crashed websites like Newgrounds and Tumblr, and for having a fandom so huge it invented the official cosplay photography meetup at cons for specific fandoms, which didn't exist before its rise in popularity in 2012. There's really nothing else you need to know about Homestuck. If I tell you any more, we'll probably be here all night. In the comic, Rose wears this dress referred to as the velvet squiddle knit gown. The buckle on her gold belt is shaped like a squiddle from the comics. It appears to be a tank top over a gray shirt with a purple skirt and black shoes. I've interpreted this in true Homestuck fashion to only really mildly resemble the one in the source material. In fact, even though the stuff I pulled was from the 18th century, it's giving Ren Faire, I won't lie. I knew that the stays would take the longest, so I decided to start on them first, and I used a really delicately colored lavender silk dupioni as the outer fabric, and some regular cotton corset couture for the strength layer, as well as a black, just regular quilting cotton lining, because I didn't want my extremely white cotton couture to be visible on the inside, because that would ruin the aesthetic. I also used a bit of cotton drill, which is another good fabric for corsets and stays, but I knew I didn't have enough fabric to do the whole corset, so I combined that just on the strength layers. I also decided on some black poofy sleeves to go with it. Every single person looks at that gray t-shirt and thinks, I am not doing that, and interprets it as some sort of transparent black shirt, which is what I have also done. This is my first mock-up for this corset, and it turned out like shockingly good. In order to get to this, I referenced like 4 different patterns. A couple of them were online and have disappeared into the void, but 2 of them were stays and corsets, historical patterns translated for the modern body, both 1 and 2 by Mandy Barrington, which are in my personal collection, and I just sort of roughly traced these pattern pieces onto my dress form, and I barely had to make any alterations whatsoever. It was truly baffling. So I made a couple of tiny changes. I think I eliminated the potential of a center back set of lacing, which I really should have kept, but I was feeling lazy and didn't want to do more lacing panels. And also just raising the front up a little bit because I knew that needed to be done, but if simplicity got a hold of me tomorrow and was like, hello, we would like to work with you for producing a stay pattern, I would be like, let me make 2 changes, and that would be just about it. So I'm really pleased with the way this pattern came out. If you also would kind of vaguely like to almost follow somebody else's pattern, use somebody else's pattern for inspiration, maybe is what you would call it, I have conveniently traced these in Sharpie so that you had a better idea from my new camera rig that I can set up immediately over my work table, and that I unfortunately forgot to move the camera little dangler for. Here's a life hack for you. If you have markings that you need to transfer that are anywhere near the edge, just use a hole punch and punch a hole through the paper so that you don't have to worry about like anything shifting while you're trying to mark stuff down. A+ on lacing holes. I marked these slanted boning channels for the sake of it being proper, but I don't really know how closely I genuinely followed them, as much as I just put 3 boning channels in that looked the most pleasing and then transferred them over using my actual panels when I actually got there. Then I started cutting out my panels, which was a struggle. Not because of anything inherent with the fabric. This dough peony is pretty stiff, so it cuts very nicely for me, but what was more annoying was that I recently rearranged my sewing room, and this is the kind of ideal arrangement for my sewing room, but in doing so, I created just the ultimate superhighway for my cats to climb and join me on my work table while I'm working. So there's so much footage that is just cat fur, and even more that's just various situations like this. But despite all of the attempted interference, I did eventually get all of my panels cut out. Obviously, 2 of each panel in the dough peony, as well as the coutil and the lining layer, and the lacing panels I also did in the cotton drill, just for an extra layer of strength and stability. Then I pin basted and then machine basted all of my panels together. Technically, this is how corsets are made, not typically how stays are made, but I knew I was going to be using a lot of external boning channels in order to complete this project, so I was already going off the beaten path in terms of stay making, and it was where I was, comfortable as someone who was dabbling in the 18th century for the first time. If you're not the kind of person, by the way, who enjoys the challenge and low-level frustration of having to put together a pattern, Frankensteining a bunch of things together, and you want like a solid pattern, Simplicity 8162 is a collaboration with American Duchess, so it's fairly legit, and that could easily be altered to have a stomacher or just sacrifice the stomacher and wear it with a regular lace up front. And this is where I briefly lost every single brain cell that I possessed. I don't know who had it. Perhaps it was Noli. Oh, she wasn't using it for any real purposes, she was just chewing on it. If you are making a set of stays or a corset, I recommend that you do the exact opposite of what I'm doing here. I recommend that you do not pin and sew your panels together at this stage. Because the thing is, it's a lot easier to install external boning channels that aren't on the seam when your pieces are laid flat and all separate. But I did not realize what I was doing with this until I had already sewn probably 6 out of 8 seams together. And then was like, oh no! And honestly, I was a little bit worried about the potential future of the silk that I was using, and I did not have time to order more if I ruined it, especially since I was using really, really tiny stitches for strength. And this clip is a really good example of why you should lay your boning channels while they're flat, if at all possible. Because while these look nice and smooth from the outside, they haven't aged quite as nicely as I'd like, and you can see on the backside from having to manipulate the fabric this much that it's a little wibbly wobbly on the back with puckers and gathers. Nothing catastrophic, but definitely an unfortunate time, especially if I were to wear this long term against my skin. It could end up causing some discomfort, and it certainly doesn't look as nice as it could. If I had done all my boning channels flat, I wouldn't have had to worry about any of this. Since the boning channels were already pointing in towards the waist, I thought it would be fun for me to do this decorative chevron design on the front of the stomacher. The actual bones are in the strength layer of the stomacher. I used a layer of coutil and a layer of drill and sewed all the boning channels directly into those and the lining because I knew that would be a lot more stable with the full bones, fully boned stomacher. Half boned is what the rest of the stays are, and that means that not every inch of it is jam-packed with bones. It's only partly boned, whereas the stomacher is fully boned, as in it is jam-packed, it is just a wall of zip ties. Then I sewed those fake channels in a little bit messily, I will admit, on the corners, but given that I was going to have a really thick lacing ribbon panel between it and the outside world, I wasn't too concerned about it and just ended up whipping those down by hand when I had a little bit more time, a process which I did not record in any way whatsoever because I was lazy and didn't feel like it. Then I boned the whole thing with zip ties. Traditionally, stays would have been boned with reed, and typically people will use either reed, synthetic whalebone, or steel. I find steel to be inappropriate in most occasions. I find synthetic whalebone to produce the most authentic silhouette, but if you either don't have the money for synthetic whalebone for anything but a workhorse of a corset, zip ties will usually do you just fine. Yeah, zip ties, the kind you get down from the hardware store. It's fine. With all of my bones in, I was able to begin the long and hateful process of binding my edges. Technically, you're not supposed to use anything double fold, meaning like a double fold bias binding, along the edges of stays because it makes the tabs bulky, but I couldn't find any half-inch wide twill tape for some reason. I don't know where it all went, but it was not available locally, and the only ribbon that I could find was too wide that was in my stash, so I ended up just going with 1/4 inch bias tape. It's fine. Yes, my little pointy boys turned into little chubby, rounded stay tabs, but I either got it done poorly or I was not getting it done. The bottom with the tabs, you're gonna have to look up somebody else's tutorial for that, because it took me like an hour and a half intermittently, and I hated everything the whole time, but it was get it done resentfully or don't get it done. And I'm trying not to leave too many things unfinished. Then I moved on to my sleeves, which the first part was the kind of base that the sleeves hook onto that is connected to the corset. And I did not film much of that because honestly it was a very simple drafting process of the width of my ruler with rounded edges to the length that I roughly knew it needed to be. And then I cut them out with my actual fabrics, bound around the edges with more 1/4-inch bias tape, and then fused on some of these cute gold appliques to make a reference back to the gold straps that were on the original drawings. And I did all of this ironing of the appliques on while having like a 45-minute conversation with my dad about mashed potatoes. The sleeves on this project are not complicated because they don't need a proper arm's eye and just attach to that little off-the-shoulder piece and then have a little bit of gathering at the wrists. You don't need to do any like actual drafting, so they are the incredibly technologically advanced technique of rectangle. I did not do any math whatsoever. I just sort of worked with the limited amount of fabric that I had, and then made a little channel for the elastic in the cuff. If you ever need to get an elastic through something really quickly, put a safety pin at both ends and then thread it through that way instead of trying to do anything fancy. And I am so sorry for my 7-Up can. They're visible in the background. I didn't realize it was there until literally just now editing the video. So, do you want me to like pixelate it? It's not very aesthetic. Then I'm gonna be real with y'all. I was really lazy about finishing these sleeves. They got a zigzag stitch on my sewing machine, during which I ran over the elastic to secure it, and you know what? It works fine. It doesn't look the prettiest if you look too close, but come on, it's black fabric. No camera is picking it up that nicely. I did a quick try-on to determine where my sleeves would need to sit, and then I used big, loose, sloppy whip stitches with heavy-duty thread in order to secure the sleeves onto the little arm shouldery doodads. These are unfortunately just barely too short that I cannot wear them up on my shoulders, which is why I need to make some adjustments in my final form. I put in metal grommets on this, and I could have sworn that I recorded it, but the footage is nowhere to be found. But maybe I didn't? It's possible that I just thought about it so hard I did, because inserting grommets is a task that I don't super love, because it seems like every die cutter that I ever purchase is dull. And then I added a bunch of gold appliques to reference the gold belt. I tried my damnedest, I swear, to find an applique that looked like a skull. But the only ones that I could find were like the size of someone's entire torso, that were lacy. So that idea was a bust. Instead I did these not quite floral appliques. Rose is not really a florals kind of gal. Then I got started on the skirt. The skirt, I will admit, is not terribly creative. It is a simple pleated skirt, and I didn't even do math about the pleats. I did the very easy, I guess, method of cutting my fabric into 3 roughly equal panels, getting those 3 into 1 long panel, and then pleating it down onto a waistband. This does not take a genius. I just kept in mind that I wanted my pleats to get denser towards the back. For 3 60-inch wide panels that are getting gathered down to like a 27-inch waistband, I actually do not recommend that you use these kinds of pleats, like a knife pleat, stacked knife pleat situation. I'd recommend that you do cartridge pleating for the back, where you can fit as much fabric as you want. But I did not have time for cartridge pleating. I barely had time for regular pleating. I didn't have time to do pleats math, so I just shoved it all under the foot as best as I could the night before, and then turned the ribbon onto the other side, top stitched it down, and called it good. Then, because I hadn't wanted to do any math, and also because I hadn't weighted down the front hem of my hoop skirt yet, I went through and I just shoved the fabric against the floor to get the correct measurement. This is actually a perfectly fine way of doing it, especially if you're working on like a client or yourself, but I just sort of put it on my dress form and did my best, because what I really wanted to do was like finish it real nicely with horsehair braid, like a 3-inch horsehair braid, to give it maximum floofage and make it look really nice. But instead, I was doing this while being bothered by cats. I installed a little loopy and a button that I thought was black, but actually turned out to be navy blue. Not that it matters, because it's gonna be hidden under the stays, but always check your button colors, kids. final step was running the edges once I'd cleaned them up just a little bit so that I didn't have any rough zigzags from actually cutting with the scissors on the floor. To just run this through my rolled hem foot was the easiest and least time-consuming method, and also didn't involve me having to crush the pile of the velvet in this jacquard. And once that had all gone through my 1/8 inch hemming foot, I was finished. This year's 413 gown is complete. I am recording this voiceover at 11 o'clock on 4/12, so that's real promising if I sound tired. That's because I am tired, because my life blew up, and now I'm an old person with an old person sleep schedule, and it is past my bedtime. It is now 14 years of Homestuck. I don't know if I would really recommend Homestuck to someone in the year 2023. A lot of what made Homestuck popular was references to vintage video games and also memes. And there's a lot of dated memes in Homestuck and a lot of shitty 2009 humor that we thought was funny because we were edgy teenagers. The fan base of Homestuck was teenagers. So, I don't know if I would recommend that you go out and read Homestuck today, but for those of us who have been along for the ride, happy 14 years of Homestuck. I don't know how else to end this video. Like this video if you liked this video. Subscribe if you would like to see more costuming content, but not necessarily cosplay costuming content. You get to next month, fingers crossed, if my life does not continue to blow up in my face and things go smoothly. You get to see the project that took me almost an entire year. You can also find links to me on the social medias in the description. I have an Instagram that I intermittently update, and a Tumblr that I post nothing sewing about, but it definitely confirms that I'm alive. You can also find the link to my Discord server, where there are lots of lovely, lovely people, mostly queer people, people who are into history, or both. It's a lovely place, everyone is very pleasant. The music for this video has once again kindly been created by Erik Sheila. It's part of the very first Homestuck album, so you also have Homestuck to thank for the sounds. I will link his website in the description below. whatever the hell that, I'm incredibly nearsighted, and so I can't wear my glasses, and it looks absolutely gorgeous outside right now for an early spring day in upstate New York, but it is in fact about 40 degrees outside, so I am absolutely freezing and I have rain odds. This also doesn't have any pockets,